By the spring of 1944, the German Panzer crews had a reputation. They had earned it. From the burning steppes of the Soviet Union to the scorched sands of North Africa, German tank crews had humiliated Allied armour again and again. The Panzer IV, the Tiger I, the Panther, these were not just machines, they were symbols. Symbols of a Wehrmacht that believed, with quiet certainty, that it had mastered the art of armoured warfare. Some of those crews were arrogant, justifiably so by their own measure. But arrogance has a cost. And in the hedgerows of Normandy, on the frozen plains of the Ardennes, and along the shattered roads of Germany itself, the United States Army began collecting that debt. Not always with tanks, not always with aircraft, often with artillery. This is what happened. To understand what American artillery did to German Panzer crews, you first have to understand why those crews believed they were untouchable. The German armoured doctrine of World War II, Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, was built on speed, coordination and shock. Tanks did not fight alone. They moved with infantry, with engineers, with close air support. And at the centre of it all was a culture of tactical flexibility that the Allies spent years struggling to replicate. The Tiger I tank, first deployed in 1942, was a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. It weighed 57 tons. Its 88mm gun could kill almost any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Its frontal armour, 100mm thick, was effectively immune to most Allied tank guns at standard combat distances. American tankers knew this. Some of them were terrified by it. There are accounts from Sherman crews in Normandy who refused to advance when Tiger tanks were reported in the area. There are after-action reports that describe Allied infantrymen simply scattering when they heard the distinctive sound of a Panzer engine in the tree line. The fear was not irrational. It was earned. But fear and invincibility are not the same thing. And the Germans, some of them, confused the two. What the Panzer crews understood about tank-on-tank combat, they understood very well. What some of them failed to fully reckon with was the growing lethality of American indirect fire. Artillery shells falling from the sky, directed by men they would never see, delivered with a precision that grew more devastating with every passing month of the war. The United States Army of World War II built one of the most sophisticated artillery systems in the history of warfare. At its core was the M101 105mm howitzer, light enough to be towed by a truck, accurate enough to place a shell within approximately 40 meters, at ranges up to 11 kilometers. In the hands of a trained crew, and American crews trained obsessively, it was capable of up to 10 rounds per minute in a burst, sustained at 3 rounds per minute. But the weapon was only part of the equation. What made American artillery genuinely fearsome was the system around it. The forward observers, the fire direction centers, the radio networks, and above all, the ability to concentrate the fires of multiple batteries onto a single point, nearly instantaneously. The process was called a time-on-target mission, or TOT. But the mathematics were precise and brutal. Multiple batteries, sometimes a dozen or more, would calculate their firing solutions so that shells from different guns, fired at different times, arrived at the target simultaneously. No warning, no rolling thunder of approaching rounds, just sudden, total annihilation. German soldiers who survived these strikes described them as unlike anything they had experienced on the Eastern Front. Not because Soviet artillery was weak, it wasn't, but because American fire direction was different, faster, more flexible, more responsive to the tactical situation on the ground. a German regimental commander, captured in France in August 1944, told his American interrogators something that became widely quoted in artillery after-action reports: that his men could handle the American tanks, as it was the artillery that destroyed them. He was not the only one who said something like that. June 1944. The bocage country of Normandy. The hedgerows of northern France are not the rolling fields of a war movie. They are walls, earthen mounds, sometimes 2 meters high, packed with roots and centuries of soil, topped with thorned hedges so thick that a man cannot push through them. Every field is a fortress. Every road is a kill zone. For German Panzer commanders, the bocage was initially a comfort. Open field engagements, the kind where American Shermans would be slaughtered at long range by Tigers and Panthers, were nearly impossible here. The close terrain neutralized Allied air power. It invited the kind of grinding, intimate combat where German infantry and armour worked best together. What the Germans did not anticipate was how quickly American artillery adapted. The 29th Infantry Division, fighting through the hedgerows towards Saint-Lô, developed a tactic born of desperation and practical genius. Forward observers, young lieutenants and sergeants who crawled into the hedgerows with radios strapped to their backs, learned to call in artillery on German positions with extraordinary precision. They learned the German patterns. When German armour gathered behind a hedgerow to stage a counter-attack, there was often a window of 15 to 20 minutes before they moved. 15 minutes was enough. An artillery liaison officer attached to the 30th Infantry Division later wrote in his after-action report that on 3 separate occasions in July 1944, German armoured counterattacks were broken up entirely by artillery before a single American rifleman fired a shot. The Panzers never reached the line. In 2 of those cases, post-battle examination of the German vehicles showed that they had been killed by airburst shells. Rounds fused to detonate above the tank, driving fragments down through the thinner top armour. The crews inside never had a chance to escape. The hull roof armour on the Panzer IV ranged from 10 to 16 millimeters depending on the variant. The hull roof armour of the Tiger I was 25 millimeters. The turret roof was upgraded to 40 millimeters from early 1944. Both were designed with the threat of ground-level attack in mind. Both were vulnerable to the sky. American artillerists had figured this out. August 1944, but the Allied breakout from Normandy, Operation Cobra, had torn open the German front. American and Canadian forces were closing in around 2 German armies in what would become known as the Falaise Pocket. Roughly 100,000 German soldiers, including elements of 12 Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions, were being encircled. They tried to escape through a corridor near the town of Falaise. American, British, Canadian, and Polish artillery, along with tactical air power, turned that corridor into something that witnesses struggled to describe afterward in clinical language. General Dwight Eisenhower visited the scene after the battle. In accounts of his visit, paraphrased from various post-war sources, or pending verification against his memoir Crusade in Europe, he described walking for hundreds of meters on nothing but the bodies of men and horses, burned-out tanks, destroyed vehicles. Artillery had caught entire columns of German armour on the roads, unable to manoeuvre in the narrow lanes, and simply destroyed them. The numbers are staggering and worth saying out loud. In the Falaise Pocket, the Germans lost an estimated 500 tanks and armoured vehicles, more than 1,000 artillery pieces, an estimated 10,000 to 15,000 men killed, another 40,000 to 50,000 captured, 500 tanks. Not all of them were killed by artillery. The RAF and USAAF flew constant missions over the pocket, but ground commanders in the aftermath were explicit. Artillery had done the bulk of the systematic destruction. The air attacks were devastating and visible, but the artillery was relentless and invisible, falling from a sky that offered no shelter, no cover, no salvation. A German Panzer officer, a veteran of the Eastern Front and the early campaigns in France in 1940, was captured near Falaise on August 20th. He told his interrogators that he had never experienced anything like what the Americans had done with their artillery. He said, and this is a direct quotation from the interrogation record, "We could fight the tanks, we could fight the planes, sometimes we could not fight this." December 1944. The Germans launched their last great offensive in the West. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge. The SS Panzer divisions at the tip of the German advance were among the best equipped armoured formations Germany had fielded since 1941. They had Panther tanks, and they had King Tigers, the massive 70-ton behemoth whose frontal armour was effectively impenetrable to most Allied weapons. They had fuel, ammunition, and a plan built on speed and shock. They had everything except a solution to American artillery. The opening days of the offensive were catastrophic for the Americans. Units were overrun, entire regiments were cut off. The line bent and, in places, broke. But the guns did not break. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne, held a critical road junction with a garrison that should have been overwhelmed. What kept them alive, in significant part, was artillery. The guns of the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, firing almost without pause for days, broke German armoured assaults again and again. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel John Cooper, later said that his men fired 7,676 rounds over the 13-day siege. 7,676 rounds over 13 days from a surrounded garrison. And the German armour that surrounded Bastogne, including elements of the 2nd Panzer Division and the Panzer Lehr Division, paid for every attempt to reduce the town in burning steel and dead men. The King Tiger, for all its armour, was still vulnerable to concentrated artillery on its thinner side and rear armour. It was still vulnerable to airburst shells on its top. It was still vulnerable to artillery-delivered mines. And it was still, critically, dependent on roads. And the roads around Bastogne were watched by American forward observers, whose sole job was to call destruction down on anything that moved. It would be unfair and inaccurate to suggest that all German panzer crews were arrogant. Many were not. Many were professional, careful, and deeply aware of their own vulnerabilities. The tactical competence of the German armoured forces in World War II is not a myth, but a particular kind of arrogance did exist, and it had consequences. It was the arrogance of a force that had defined the terms of armoured combat for 4 years and assumed those terms would not change. The assumption that superior tank design meant invulnerability. The assumption that American industrial production would be offset by German tactical excellence. The assumption that an enemy who had been beaten before could be beaten again. The United States Army did not beat German armour by building better tanks, though the M4A3E8 Sherman with its 76mm gun was a significant improvement. It did not beat German armour purely through weight of numbers, and though numbers mattered enormously. It beat German armour, in no small part, by developing the most effective artillery system of the war, and by using it with a ruthless, relentless efficiency that the Panzer arm never fully solved. American artillery killed tanks. It killed the crews inside them. It killed the men who were supposed to support them. And it did so from distances and with a speed that made response nearly impossible. The German Panzer force was formidable. It deserves the respect that history has given it. But respect is not the same as invincibility. And the American field artillery, those men in the tree lines and the farmhouses, the forward observers in the foxholes, the gun crews who worked their howitzers until the barrels were too hot to touch, they proved the difference. The Battle of the Bulge ended in late January 1945. The German army that emerged from the Ardennes was a shadow of what had entered it. The great Panzer divisions that had once defined a new kind of warfare were shattered, low on fuel, low on men, low on tanks. By April 1945, American artillery was firing into the streets of German cities. The guns that had broken the Panzer arm in the hedgerows of Normandy and the snow of the Ardennes were now ending the war itself. There is a quiet irony in the way this story ends. The German armoured force, celebrated for its technical excellence, its tactical brilliance, its legacy of victories that still fills bookshelves today, was, in the end, ground down not by a more brilliant adversary, but by a more capable system. A system that could find you in a hedgerow. A system that could reach you on a road with no cover. A system that did not care how thick your armour was on the front, because it was always looking for the top. The arrogance did not doom the Panzer arm. The artillery did. But the arrogance made it easier.